Hello students, and welcome to our short field approach and landing execution video. Before we jump into the cockpit, let's quickly discuss the objective of this maneuver and some key factors that we're going to be focusing on. The objective of a short field approach and landing is to safely land the aircraft on a short or shorter than normal runway where obstacles may be present along the approach path. So we're coming into a runway, it might be shorter than we're used to, and we might have some obstacles that we need to clear on that final approach path. In this maneuver execution video, we will not be covering detailed aerodynamics, maneuver diagrams, common student errors, or the ACS standards. This video is to simply explain and demonstrate the execution of the maneuver and will vary based on the aircraft that you are flying. To see all the additional details that we just mentioned and to study this lesson's full-length presentation, podcast, diagrams, flashcards, lesson quiz, and way more, look up the short field approach and landing lesson on our website, wificfi.com. Lastly, before we jump into the cockpit, there are a couple key things that we want to cover regarding this maneuver. First, we're going to place a huge emphasis on a stabilized approach. Now, we talked about this in our normal landing lesson. We'll talk about it just a little bit here. Okay, stabilized approach. We want to start with the exact definition of it. A stabilized approach is one in which the pilot establishes and maintains a constant angle glide path towards a predetermined point on the landing runway. In other words, we've got a point on the runway that we want to land on. We're going to establish and maintain a constant glide path towards that predetermined point. Okay, we're not going to be climbing, descending. We're not going to have large changes in power where we're speeding up and slowing down, or we're banking left and right too hard. Okay, everything's just going to be nice and gentle, small corrections, and we're going to keep that nice constant angle glide path, that constant airspeed all the way down to our round out and flare. If you do this right, landings are just way easier. So we cannot emphasize enough how important stabilized approaches are. Also, when we load in, we'll complete the before landing checklist. We're going to begin on the downwind leg of the traffic pattern at the traffic pattern altitude, and we'll be about 90 knots when we get started here on the downwind leg. We'll continue on the downwind leg, beam our landing point. We'll go ahead and reduce our power. We'll then extend our flaps and begin a nice stabilized descent at 80 knots. Next, we'll make our turn onto the base leg of the traffic pattern. We'll increase our flaps to 20 degrees and we'll continue our stabilized descent at 70. Lastly, we'll go ahead, we'll turn, we'll get lined up with final, and we'll align our airplane with the center line of the runway. At this point, we're going to go ahead and increase our flaps to 30 degrees or full, and our final approach speed here is going to be 61 knots. So on final, we're going to be looking for 61 knots. Upon crossing the threshold of the runway, we're smoothly going to reduce our throttle to idle and complete the round out flare and touchdown. Touchdown should be made on the center line of the runway with no side drift and at a slow airspeed just above stall speed. After we touch down, we're going to retract our flaps. The reason we do that is we're going to be getting some weight on our wheels. We're going to be taking weight off of the wings. That weight on the wheels is going to give us some friction that's going to help us slow down. We'll then use our rudder pedals to maintain centerline. We'll execute maximum braking with our toe brakes, and we'll also be using our yoke to give us some aerodynamic braking as we slow to a safe taxi speed and exit the runway. Okay, we're going to cover the rest in the airplane, so let's get out there and execute this maneuver, show you guys how it's done. All right, we are here at our airplane. So before we continue on with this short field approach and landing maneuver, just want to kind of show you guys where we're at in the process, how we got the plane set up, and then we'll go ahead and continue. So as you can see, we are on a, let me go ahead and pop over here, a downwind leg, left downwind for this runway 31, the one that we're flying parallel to right here. Jumping into the cockpit, we can see that we have our traffic pattern altitude bug, 5,500 feet. We've got our downwind heading 130, and our airspeed is looking good at 90 knots. So what we're going to do here is we're going to continue on the downwind leg, flying parallel to this runway. Once we get about a beam, the end of the runway or a landing point, we're going to go ahead and bring that throttle back a little bit. We're going to add a notch of flaps and begin a nice stabilized descent at 80. So 90 here, 80 after the flaps, turn on to base, more flaps, 70, turn on to final, more flaps, 61. So that's kind of where our flap settings and our speeds are going to be. Last thing before we continue, at this point we would have already completed our before landing checklist as well. Now that's going to vary for each different aircraft, but it's going to include things such as setting your mixture for landing, your cowl flaps, your lights, you know, getting ATIS or AWAS, all of those different kinds of things. So we're just going to assume that we have already completed that, since it does vary for each different type of aircraft. And the last thing I want to show you is this is the view that we're going to have as we are looking to see when to turn from base to final, when to start our descent. We're going to be looking out this left window like so. So I think that's it. Let's go ahead and unpause it. Go ahead and kick off our autopilot, and we will fly right along here with this maneuver. Again, as with any landing, we're going to be looking for that stabilized descent where we've got a constant angle glide path, constant airspeed. Everything's just nice, smooth, and easy. And we'll be looking at our runway as we come along here. Looks like we're about midfield, so we can go a little bit further. Altitude, heading, airspeed. Just keeping an eye on those things. Making very small adjustments to power and trim. Nothing crazy. And I think we're at a good spot here. So let's go ahead and bring that nose back down just a little bit. We're going to bring our power back. And we're going to extend 1 notch of flaps as we begin a descent about 80. Nice stabilized descent at 80, remember. After we put our flaps in, that's what we're looking for. Nothing crazy. Just a nice, easy descent. And we're going to keep looking back at our runway to kind of see where we're at. We're looking pretty good here. We can probably go ahead and turn base. Small adjustments to power, trim, the yoke. We're going to come out on base. We're going to add our 2nd notch of flaps, and we're going to be looking for about 70. We'll make sure we're not sinking too quickly here. Come out on base. Let's go ahead, add in that 2nd notch of flaps. See how we're looking on final. Probably even start our turn right over to final. So we're going to make this turn over to final. We're going to get aligned with center line, and then we're going to be focusing on basically 3 main things: our airspeed, our constant angle glide path,
500,
and staying on center line. Sorry, that was the 3rd thing. Making sure that we're lined up, staying on center line. So let's extend our last notch of flaps here, and we're going to start slowing down for that 61. So we're looking at airspeed, glide path, center line, airspeed, glide path. Just keeping that center line between our legs. So center line, airspeed, our glide path is looking good, wide over red, airspeed's looking good, center line's looking good. Nice and easy with everything. Small control inputs, nice and gentle. Center line, airspeed, glide path, it's all looking good. As we cross the threshold of the runway, we're smoothly going to walk this throttle back to idle. We're going to get a little lower, kind of start our round out, and then our flare, touching down on that main landing gear. As soon as we touch down, we're going to bring those flaps up, and we're going to add our braking and our aerodynamic braking. So our toe brakes, and then we're going to pull back on that yoke to give us some aerodynamic braking. And I can go ahead and kind of show you what that looks like. So when we do pull back on that yoke, we can see that we've got that our elevator is deflected up. That's giving us quite a bit of drag as well. So you can see how quickly we stopped from where we touched down to where we came to a stop. As long as once you touch down, you bring those flaps up, right? You get on the toe brakes and you kind of bring that yoke back to give yourself some aerodynamic braking, you will come to a stop in a very short distance, and that's what we need when we are doing a short field approach and landing. So thanks for joining us on this execution maneuver video, guys, and we'll see you on the next one soon.